NFL free agency is less than 2 weeks away. So what do you need to know for your fantasy football teams? I'm Jennifer Piacenti with Sports Illustrated, and joining me today, our senior fantasy analyst, Michael Fabiano. Fabs, let's talk quarterbacks. None of these guys are super exciting to me, but who do you have as the #1 quarterback free agent in this offseason?
It's underwhelming, this list, right? And Jameis
Yeah.
Winston is the #1 guy, a guy who averaged right around 17 points per game last season, albeit, remember, he was injured, so he didn't play a full 17 games. And in fantasy, he's a QB2. And the Saints clearly have interest in bringing him back, which stinks because I love Taysom Hill. But some other teams that could have interest are the Broncos, the Commanders, maybe the Steelers, too.
And the next guy on the list, Teddy Two Gloves. Where do you think he may land in free agency?
Maybe he stays in Denver if the Broncos can't get Aaron Rodgers from Green Bay or Deshaun Watson from Houston, and I don't know that either one will happen. Certainly not Rodgers, in my opinion. Teddy Bridgewater is, I hate to use the pun because it's a bad one, he's a bridge quarterback to some other younger signal caller that a team might have, or a guy that is going to be a one-year fill-in like he has been the last few years. So he could go to the Commanders, he can go to the Steelers. I don't know that he'd go back to the Saints, but that's also a possibility as well. The Buccaneers, Broncos, as I mentioned, could also be in on Teddy Two Gloves.
Now, there's lots of changes going on in Las Vegas. You think they retain Marcus Mariota?
I don't think so, because if Mariota goes to another team, he's got a shot to start. I really do. And if you bring in Mariota to compete with your current incumbent, right, maybe the Browns would bring him in because Baker Mayfield has been somewhat of a disappointment over the last season. The Colts could bring him in. There's talk about Carson Wentz maybe not being back in Indianapolis. The Texans, the Steelers could all be good fantasy fits for Mariota because those teams would give him a shot to start and have value.
Yeah, I do think Mariota could have value on your fantasy football teams if he changes teams. Absolutely. He's got that mobile upside. All right, next up, the guy that Brandon Beane, the Bills GM, said is the kind of guy you might want to marry your daughter. Where does he land in the offseason?
Well, I don't have a daughter. I have a lot of fantasy football teams. And I got to be honest with you, I think Mitchell Trubisky is going to end up being a starting quarterback in the National Football League in 2022. I know Bears fans are probably going crazy right now, but there's just not 32 better quarterbacks in the National Football League than Mitchell Trubisky. I mean, let's be honest. And I mentioned the Colts. Like, they could be a landing spot for Trubisky if the team decides to get out of the Carson Wentz business. The Commanders could be an option. The Panthers could be an option. The Steelers and the Texans, and maybe even the Giants if they want to bring in competition for Daniel Jones. But ultimately, I think that would be more of a backup role. But, folks, Mitchell Trubisky is going to have fantasy value next season. Kind of weird to think that.
I love it, but I think you're right. And finally, what about our old friend, Fitzmagic?
Yeah, Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's old. He's going to be 40 in November. What's weird about Fitzpatrick is that when he joins a team as a backup, he ultimately ends up starting because the guy ahead of him gets hurt. When he goes to a team to be the starter, he's the one that gets hurt, and then he doesn't play. I don't even know if he's going to return to the National Football League. Again, he's going to be 40 in November, but he will be a backup someplace if he does stay in the league and active. So, the Broncos, the Buccaneers, maybe the Jaguars, the Texans could be an option for Ryan Fitzpatrick if he decides to come back.
Yeah, Fitzpatrick, definitely a great backup quarterback option. Well, we'll just keep our eyes peeled. We'll have all the information you need over at si.com/fantasy.